Hey friends, today we're looking at leaders who had all the power in the world and somehow still made the worst possible choice.
History wasn't built by geniuses. It was built by powerful people making unbelievably stupid decisions. Before we begin, subscribe for more absurd history every week and join our Telegram channel through the link in the description below. That's where the uncensored chaos, bonus stories, and extra historical disasters live. Now grab your popcorn, lower your expectations for humanity, and let's meet the rulers who treated entire nations like a broken shopping cart. 1. King Louis XVI thought locks were more important than a revolution. France was collapsing. The economy was on fire. Peasants were starving, bread prices were climbing faster than gas station coffee prices during a hurricane, and angry citizens were practically sharpening pitchforks in the streets. And what was King Louis XVI doing during this historic meltdown? Obsessing over locks. Actual locks. The man was addicted to locksmithing like it was a 1700s version of fantasy football. Historians found journal entries from critical revolutionary days where Louis wrote absolutely nothing except things like "worked on locks today." Imagine being the captain of the Titanic and logging "adjusted deck chair angle, productive afternoon." While Paris was preparing to explode into revolution, this man was sitting in a workshop happily tinkering with metal mechanisms like a retired dad fixing a lawnmower. Eventually, the French people decided maybe the country needed someone slightly more engaged with reality. That decision led directly to the guillotine. Turns out when your kingdom is collapsing, master hobbyist isn't the leadership quality people are looking for. 2. Emperor Qin Shi Huang accidentally poisoned himself. Searching for immortality. China's first emperor united an enormous empire, built massive infrastructure projects, and commanded absolute power. Unfortunately, he also became completely obsessed with never dying. Which, historically speaking, is usually the moment powerful rulers start making decisions that sound like late-night infomercials. Qin Shi Huang ordered alchemists to create magical immortality pills. Their solution? Mercury. Yes, literal mercury. The same substance modern thermometers stopped using because we collectively agreed poisoning ourselves was bad. But back then, court advisors treated toxic metal like a wellness supplement. The emperor swallowed mercury pills constantly because he believed they would grant eternal life. Instead, they slowly destroyed his body and brain. Imagine becoming ruler of all China only to get scammed by ancient snake oil salesmen selling forever chemicals. The irony is almost artistic. The man spent years trying to avoid death and ended up speedrunning directly toward it. Somewhere in history, there's probably an alchemist saying, well, technically, he is remembered forever. That's the closest anyone got to fulfilling the warranty. 3. Napoleon invaded Russia. Like winter was just a mild suggestion. Napoleon Bonaparte conquered most of Europe and convinced himself he was basically unbeatable. That level of confidence is dangerous because eventually your brain stops receiving warning messages entirely. In 1812, Napoleon decided invading Russia was a fantastic idea. Not during summer, not with proper winter gear. No. He marched over 600,000 troops into Russia while apparently believing snow was just decorative scenery. The Russians responded with the historical equivalent of unplugging the Wi-Fi and leaving. They burned crops, abandoned cities, and forced the French army deeper into freezing territory. Then winter arrived like an unpaid electricity bill. Soldiers froze to death. Horses collapsed. Supplies vanished. Men were eating leather belts just to survive. By the time Napoleon retreated, only a tiny fraction of his army remained alive. It was one of history's greatest military disasters. Imagine organizing the largest invasion in Europe and getting defeated by weather conditions everyone else on Earth already understood. Russia didn't even need to fully beat him. Winter basically looked at Napoleon and said, "Relax, I got this." 4. President Herbert Hoover told Americans prosperity was just around the corner. Few political phrases aged worse than Herbert Hoover confidently telling Americans that prosperity was right around the corner during the Great Depression. Unfortunately, the corner turned out to be approximately 14 years long and filled with economic misery. When the stock market collapsed in 1929, millions lost jobs, banks failed overnight, and families stood in bread lines wondering if soup counted as dinner. Meanwhile, Hoover kept giving speeches that sounded like a motivational poster hanging in a bankrupt office supply store. He believed the economy would magically fix itself if everyone stayed optimistic enough. That's basically like watching your house burn down while saying, "The flames are showing excellent teamwork." Hoover refused massive direct federal aid because he thought government assistance would weaken American character. Easy opinion to have when you're not eating boiled potatoes 3 times a day. Eventually, entire shanty towns built by homeless citizens were sarcastically nicknamed Hoovervilles. Imagine failing so badly at leadership that desperate people name cardboard neighborhoods after you. That's not political criticism anymore. That's historical branding damage. 5. King George III. Taxed tea. So hard, he accidentally created America. The British Empire once controlled enormous parts of the world, but somehow one of its biggest disasters started because people got angry about beverages. King George III and the British government kept taxing the American colonies repeatedly, squeezing money from them like a casino slot machine that refused to pay out. But the tea tax became the final straw. Imagine telling Americans they have to pay extra for caffeinated leaves while also giving them zero political representation. That's basically challenging an entire population to become violently patriotic. Colonists lost their minds. The Boston Tea Party happened because angry citizens decided the harbor needed more flavor. Britain responded with even harsher punishments, which only made rebellion spread faster. The king treated colonial frustration like a customer complaint he could ignore indefinitely. Instead, he accidentally turned frustrated taxpayers into revolutionaries with muskets. It's honestly impressive. Britain had one of the most powerful militaries on Earth and still managed to lose control of an entire continent because they couldn't stop micromanaging tea prices. Somewhere in history, there's probably a British accountant quietly whispering, "Maybe we pushed the tea thing too hard." 6. Tsar Nicholas II went on vacation. While Russia was falling apart, by the early 1900s, Russia was basically a pressure cooker with dynamite taped to the lid. Workers were starving, protests were erupting everywhere, the military was struggling, and public anger toward the monarchy was reaching terrifying levels. So, naturally, Tsar Nicholas II made the calm, rational decision to go on vacation repeatedly and avoid reality entirely. The man treated revolution warnings like annoying spam emails. Advisors begged him to modernize reforms, listen to citizens, or at least acknowledge the chaos. Nicholas responded with the energy of a dad, ignoring dashboard warning lights because the car was probably fine. Even worse, he allowed deeply unpopular figures like Rasputin to influence the royal family while ordinary Russians suffered through poverty and war. Eventually, protests exploded into full revolution. The Romanov dynasty collapsed completely, ending over 300 years of imperial rule. Nicholas had countless opportunities to adapt and save the monarchy, but instead he kept pretending everything was under control while the country metaphorically caught fire behind him. It's one of history's greatest examples of leadership by denial. Russia didn't just lose confidence in the Tsar, they unsubscribed from monarchy altogether. 7. Saddam Hussein thought the United States would ignore Kuwait. In 1990, Saddam Hussein looked at neighboring Kuwait and apparently thought invading another country would be treated like borrowing someone's lawn chair without permission. Iraq was struggling financially after years of war, and Saddam convinced himself Kuwait's oil wealth could solve his problems. His advisors warned him the international response might be severe. Saddam ignored them with the confidence of a man who'd clearly never read the phrase global coalition. He assumed the United States and other nations would complain loudly for a few weeks and then move on to football season. Instead, the world responded with overwhelming military force during the Gulf War. Iraqi forces were crushed astonishingly fast. It was like bringing a shopping cart to a Formula One race. Saddam's decision isolated Iraq internationally, devastated the economy, and triggered decades of instability that haunted the region long afterward. The entire invasion was based on catastrophic overconfidence and terrible assumptions about how much chaos the world would tolerate. History is full of leaders making bad gambles, but invading Kuwait while assuming nobody important would care ranks near the top of the "what exactly was the plan here" category. 8. Mao Zedong declared war on sparrows and accidentally helped cause famine. Sometimes history produces decisions so bizarre they sound fake, even when they're completely real. In 1958, Chinese leader Mao Zedong launched the Four Pests campaign, targeting rats, flies, mosquitoes, and sparrows. Why sparrows? Because officials believed the birds were eating valuable grain seeds, Mao ordered citizens across China to eliminate them entirely. People banged pots and pans for hours to prevent sparrows from landing until the exhausted birds literally fell dead from the sky. Entire communities joined the anti-sparrow crusade with the enthusiasm of people trying to win a carnival prize. There was just one tiny problem. Sparrows also ate enormous numbers of insects. Once the birds disappeared, locust populations exploded, like nature had suddenly removed the parental supervision. Swarms devastated crops across the country, worsening one of the deadliest famines in human history. Millions died during the Great Chinese Famine, caused by a horrifying combination of disastrous policies and environmental mismanagement. Imagine declaring war on tiny birds and accidentally helping unleash biblical-level crop destruction. It's the kind of decision that sounds less like government policy and more like a cartoon villain losing control of an evil science experiment. 9. Adolf Hitler tried to fight everybody at once. One of the most catastrophic decisions in military history wasn't just invading countries. It was deciding apparently all the countries should become enemies simultaneously. Adolf Hitler had already conquered huge parts of Europe when he made the spectacularly terrible choice to invade the Soviet Union in 1941 while still fighting Britain. Then, after Japan attacked Pearl Harbor, Hitler voluntarily declared war on the United States too. Historians still look at this moment the way mechanics stare at a car engine that somehow exploded twice. Germany suddenly faced the industrial might of America, the endless manpower of the Soviet Union, and the resistance of Britain all at once. It was geopolitical speedrunning toward disaster. German generals warned him repeatedly that opening multiple massive fronts was unsustainable. Hitler ignored them because dictators often mistake early success for proof they're secretly superheroes. Instead, Germany became trapped in a war it physically couldn't sustain. Factories collapsed under pressure, resources vanished, and enemy armies closed in from every direction. It's the historical equivalent of picking a fight with 3 NFL teams while standing in flip-flops and insisting confidence alone will handle the details. 10. President Andrew Johnson thought he could defeat Congress through pure stubbornness. After Abraham Lincoln's assassination, Andrew Johnson became president during one of the most fragile periods in American history. The Civil War had just ended, the country was deeply divided, and the government desperately needed careful leadership. Johnson instead chose the political strategy of a guy arguing with customer service at a hardware store. He constantly fought Congress, vetoed major Reconstruction bills, and openly antagonized lawmakers trying to rebuild the South. At one point, Congress passed laws specifically designed to stop Johnson from firing officials without approval. Johnson looked at those laws and basically said, "That sign can't stop me because I refuse to read." Then he fired Secretary of War Edwin Stanton anyway. Congress immediately impeached him. He survived removal from office by exactly 1 vote, which is honestly the political equivalent of your phone surviving a fall because it landed perfectly on a couch cushion. Johnson's refusal to cooperate crippled Reconstruction efforts and deepened national tensions for years. Imagine inheriting leadership after Lincoln and somehow making people nostalgic for congressional shouting matches. Historians consistently rank him among America's worst presidents because he treated national healing like a personal ego contest nobody else wanted to participate in. 11. King Croesus misunderstood a prophecy and destroyed his own empire. King Croesus of Lydia was incredibly wealthy. In fact, the phrase rich as Croesus still exists because this man basically had ancient billionaire energy. Naturally, when you're rich enough for history to turn your name into a financial adjective, eventually you start believing you're invincible. Before going to war against Persia, Croesus consulted the famous Oracle of Delphi for advice. The oracle delivered a cryptic prophecy saying that if he attacked Persia, a great empire would fall. Croesus heard exactly what he wanted to hear. He assumed the prophecy meant Persia would collapse, so he confidently marched into war feeling like destiny itself had handed him VIP tickets to victory. Tiny issue though, the empire that got destroyed was his own. Persia absolutely crushed Lydia, captured Croesus, and absorbed the kingdom entirely. This is why vague prophecies and overconfident leaders are historically a terrible combination. Croesus basically interpreted mystical warnings the same way people read internet personality quizzes. He only accepted the parts that sounded flattering. Somewhere, that oracle was probably sitting there thinking, technically, I never said which empire. 12. Emperor Valerian tried negotiating with Persia and got used as furniture. Roman Emperor Valerian made one of history's worst diplomatic miscalculations during a war with the Persian Empire. Rome was already struggling with invasions, economic chaos, and internal instability when Valerian decided he could personally negotiate peace with Persian ruler Shapur I. Now, historically, when emperors personally walk into enemy territory during wartime, things usually don't end with handshakes and fruit platters. Valerian somehow believed diplomacy would smooth everything over. Instead, Shapur captured him immediately. And this wasn't a polite house arrest situation either. Ancient sources claim Valerian was humiliated constantly, reportedly forced to serve as a human footstool when Shapur mounted his horse. Imagine ruling the Roman Empire only to end up treated like decorative furniture in someone else's palace. Roman citizens were horrified because emperors were supposed to embody unstoppable power, not become cautionary tales about terrible negotiation strategy. Valerian died in captivity, marking one of the greatest humiliations in Roman history. The entire disaster happened because he dramatically underestimated Persia while overestimating his personal authority. It's basically the ancient world equivalent of showing up to a biker gang meeting expecting a productive networking opportunity. 13. Richard Nixon tried to cover up a break-in and destroyed himself. Instead, the original Watergate break-in was already bad enough. But the truly legendary disaster came afterward, when President Richard Nixon transformed a small political scandal into one of the most infamous collapses in American history. In 1972, burglars connected to Nixon's re-election campaign were caught breaking into Democratic Party headquarters. At first, the incident looked manageable. Then, Nixon began covering it up with the subtlety of a raccoon hiding stolen food under a throw pillow. Secret payments were arranged, investigators were obstructed, and officials lied repeatedly. Unfortunately for Nixon, the White House had one fatal design flaw. He secretly recorded his own conversations. That's right. The president accidentally created a self-snitching machine. Once investigators discovered the tapes, the entire administration unraveled spectacularly fast. Nixon eventually resigned before impeachment could remove him from office. Think about how absurd this is. A president survived Cold War tensions, massive protests, and global political pressure, only to be defeated by his own recording system. It's the political equivalent of setting up security cameras and accidentally filming yourself stealing your own TV. Watergate proved one timeless truth. The cover-up is often way dumber than the original mistake. 14. Benito Mussolini thought Italy was ready for World War II. Italy disagreed. Benito Mussolini desperately wanted Italy to look like a mighty modern empire during World War II. The problem was that Italy's military was held together with optimism, outdated equipment, and what appears to have been several angry bicycles. Mussolini joined Hitler's war effort expecting quick victories and glorious expansion. Instead, Italian campaigns became a non-stop parade of logistical disasters. Troops lacked supplies, tanks broke constantly, and soldiers were sent into combat with equipment that looked left over from a museum exhibit. At one point, Italian forces invading Greece were pushed backwards so badly that Germany had to bail them out. Imagine joining a group project and immediately becoming the reason everyone else loses sleep. Mussolini consistently overestimated Italy's readiness because dictators tend to believe their own propaganda after hearing it long enough. Meanwhile, ordinary soldiers paid the price for leadership fueled entirely by ego and dramatic speeches. By the end of the war, Italy had collapsed politically and militarily. Mussolini's dream of rebuilding a Roman-style empire ended with him becoming one of history's clearest examples of confidence, wildly outrunning competence. Basically, he brought motivational poster energy to a mechanized global war. 15. President James Buchanan watched America collapse and basically shrugged. James Buchanan had perhaps the worst possible timing in presidential history. He led the United States right before the Civil War, when tensions between North and South were exploding faster than microwave popcorn in a broken machine. States were threatening secession, political violence was spreading, and the nation was visibly falling apart. Buchanan's response? Mostly nervous inactivity. He believed states technically didn't have the legal right to leave the Union, but also believed the federal government couldn't stop them. That's like watching someone steal your car while calmly explaining theft is illegal, but deciding intervention feels impolite. As Southern states began seceding after Abraham Lincoln's election, Buchanan did almost nothing meaningful to stop the crisis. Federal forts were abandoned, tensions escalated, and the country drifted toward catastrophe while Buchanan delivered speeches with the emotional urgency of a man discussing wallpaper samples. By the time Lincoln took office, America was already sliding into civil war. Historians consistently rank Buchanan near the bottom of presidential lists because his leadership style during national collapse can best be described as professional bystander. The nation needed decisive action. Instead, it got a man aggressively committed to avoiding conflict until conflict became unavoidable. 16. Emperor Montezuma welcomed the Spanish like honored guests. When Spanish conquistador Hernán Cortés arrived in the Aztec Empire in 1519, Emperor Montezuma II faced one of history's most important first impressions. Unfortunately, he handled it the way someone handles a scam email promising free cruise tickets. Montezuma believed Cortés might be connected to ancient prophecies about returning gods. So, instead of immediately crushing the tiny invading force, he welcomed the Spaniards into the capital city of Tenochtitlan with gifts, hospitality, and enough gold to make every conquistador's eyes turn into cartoon dollar signs. Cortés looked around at unimaginable wealth and probably thought, "Oh, we are absolutely stealing this place." The Spanish eventually took Montezuma hostage inside his own palace while bringing disease, chaos, and military destruction into the empire. Imagine allowing armed strangers into your house because you thought they seemed spiritually interesting. The Aztecs had enormous military strength and could have potentially destroyed the invaders early on. Instead, hesitation and misplaced trust gave Cortés exactly the opening he needed. It's one of history's greatest examples of a leader mistaking dangerous opportunists for honored visitors. Hospitality is admirable, just maybe not toward heavily armed colonizers carrying cannons. 17. Kaiser Wilhelm II fired the one man. Keeping Europe stable, before World War I, Germany had one massive advantage: Otto von Bismarck, a political mastermind who spent decades carefully preventing Europe from exploding into chaos. Bismarck built complicated alliances specifically designed to avoid giant continental wars. Then Kaiser Wilhelm II took the throne and decided this experienced strategist was ruining the vibe. Wilhelm wanted dramatic speeches, flashy military expansion, and personal glory. Bismarck kept recommending boring things like diplomacy and restraint, which to Wilhelm sounded suspiciously like, "Not enough attention for me." So the Kaiser fired him. Historians everywhere collectively developed stress headaches. Without Bismarck managing European tensions, Germany's foreign policy became increasingly reckless. Alliances weakened, rivalries intensified, and Europe slowly transformed into a room full of angry nations holding lit matches near gasoline barrels. Wilhelm constantly antagonized other powers while believing Germany could intimidate everyone indefinitely. Then World War I arrived and demolished millions of lives. It's honestly astonishing. Germany had one of history's greatest diplomatic experts and replaced him with a man whose leadership style resembled a guy revving a motorcycle indoors because he likes the noise. Sometimes the worst decision a leader can make is removing the one adult in the room. 18. King Harold II took a nap before the battle that ended England. In 1066, England faced two invasions almost back-to-back. King Harold II first marched north to defeat Viking invaders at the Battle of Stamford Bridge. Huge victory. The problem? Immediately afterward, he had to rush his exhausted army all the way south because William of Normandy had invaded too. Harold's troops were physically drained, sleep-deprived, and running on pure medieval caffeine energy. Historians believe Harold still had opportunities to delay the fight and regroup. Instead, he pushed straight into the Battle of Hastings anyway. It's the military equivalent of finishing a marathon and immediately entering a cage fight because your calendar looked busy. English soldiers were exhausted before the battle even started. Meanwhile, William's forces were rested and prepared. The result permanently changed English history. Harold was killed during the battle, traditionally remembered as taking an arrow to the eye, and William conquered England completely. The Norman conquest reshaped language, culture, and politics forever. Imagine altering the future of an entire nation because you couldn't tell your army, "Guys, maybe let's sleep first." History's full of dramatic wars, but this one partly came down to catastrophic scheduling and medieval burnout. 19. Muammar Gaddafi thought everyone loved his giant tents and weird speeches. Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi spent decades surrounding himself with bizarre luxury, elaborate titles, and enough personal eccentricities to fill an entire reality TV network. He traveled internationally with giant Bedouin tents, female bodyguards, and speeches that often sounded like someone lost halfway through a philosophy podcast. Over time, Gaddafi became increasingly disconnected from ordinary Libyans. While people struggled economically and politically, he appeared convinced the population admired his theatrical behavior and endless self-promotion. Then the Arab Spring protests erupted in 2011, and Gaddafi reacted like a man discovering the restaurant staff actually hated him the entire time. He gave rambling televised speeches insisting protesters were drugged, manipulated, or traitors, rather than acknowledging genuine public anger. Instead of calming tensions, his responses intensified them dramatically. Civil war followed, NATO intervened, and his regime collapsed completely. One of the strangest parts is how genuinely shocked Gaddafi seemed that people no longer supported him. Dictators often create information bubbles where everyone around them pretends everything is fantastic to avoid prison. Eventually, reality arrives anyway. In Gaddafi's case, it arrived carrying revolution, international airstrikes, and decades of accumulated public rage. 20. Emperor Commodus thought. Being a gladiator was great leadership. Most Roman emperors at least pretended ruling an empire was their main job. Commodus looked at the responsibilities of governing Rome and decided arena cosplay sounded more exciting. Instead of focusing on politics, military stability, or economic problems, Commodus became obsessed with performing as a gladiator, and not normal gladiator appearances either. He staged ridiculously one-sided contests where professional fighters were forced to lose or risk execution. Imagine being Emperor of Rome and using unlimited national power to create fake WWE matches starring yourself. He even charged citizens money to watch these performances, essentially turning imperial leadership into a narcissistic pay-per-view event. Meanwhile, corruption spread through the government and public confidence collapsed. Roman elites viewed Commodus less like a respected ruler and more like a rich celebrity having a very public breakdown with swords. Eventually, conspirators assassinated him, ending one of Rome's most embarrassing reigns. Historians often consider Commodus a symbol of imperial decline because he treated the Roman Empire like a personal talent show. Rome needed stability and competent leadership. Instead, it got a man screaming, "Are you not entertained?" while pretending to fight disabled ostriches in a stadium. 21. Neville Chamberlain trusted Hitler's promises. Like a used car salesman. In 1938, British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain desperately wanted to avoid another catastrophic European war. Understandable goal. World War I had devastated an entire generation, and nobody wanted a sequel. The problem was, Chamberlain believed Adolf Hitler's promises with the confidence of someone buying a suspiciously cheap car from a man named Fast Eddie. Hitler demanded part of Czechoslovakia called the Sudetenland, claiming it was his final territorial demand. Chamberlain negotiated the Munich Agreement, returned home triumphantly, and famously declared he had achieved peace for our time. Europe collectively had about 11 months before World War II exploded anyway. Hitler immediately continued aggressive expansion because dictators rarely interpret concessions as reasons to become polite. Chamberlain's policy of appeasement became one of history's most famous diplomatic failures. To be fair, he genuinely wanted peace, but he fundamentally misunderstood who he was dealing with. It's the international politics version of handing your lunch money to a bully and believing the relationship is now built on mutual respect. Chamberlain thought compromise would satisfy Hitler. Instead, it convinced Germany that Europe lacked the will to resist until it was far too late. 22. Francisco Pizarro invited the Inca emperor to dinner and kidnapped him instead. When Spanish conquistador Francisco Pizarro arrived in the Inca Empire, Emperor Atahualpa had every reason to feel confident. The Incas controlled enormous territory, massive armies, and incredible wealth. Pizarro, meanwhile, showed up with fewer than 200 men looking like they'd accidentally wandered out of a very violent garage sale. Atahualpa underestimated the Spanish so badly it became a masterclass in catastrophic overconfidence. He agreed to meet Pizarro in the city of Cajamarca with minimal military protection because he assumed the tiny foreign force posed no real threat. That decision aged like milk left inside a volcano. During the meeting, the Spanish launched a surprise attack using guns, horses, and sheer chaos to terrify Inca forces unfamiliar with European warfare. Thousands of Incas died while Atahualpa was captured alive. The emperor later filled an entire room with gold as ransom, one of the largest treasure payments in history. Pizarro took the gold and executed him anyway. Imagine inviting suspicious strangers to dinner and accidentally handing them your empire between appetizers and dessert. It remains one of history's most devastating examples of misjudging dangerous opportunists. 23. King John of England lost the crown jewels in a swamp. King John already had a terrible reputation before his most legendary disaster. This was the same ruler who angered nobles so badly they forced him to sign the Magna Carta. But somehow, John still found time to create one of medieval history's greatest accidental comedy moments. In 1216, while traveling through eastern England during a military campaign, John decided to take a shortcut across marshland called the Wash, because historically, shortcuts through dangerous swamps always end wonderfully. The king's baggage train carrying royal treasure, supplies, and the English crown jewels became trapped by rising tides and thick mud. Entire wagons vanished into the swamp forever. Imagine being the King of England and losing priceless national treasures because your navigation strategy resembled a dad refusing to ask for directions on a road trip. The jewels were never recovered, meaning somewhere beneath English mud, there may still be a giant medieval jackpot quietly waiting for confused treasure hunters. John's reign was already falling apart politically and militarily, and this disaster only deepened his humiliation. Future generations basically remembered him as the king who somehow managed to misplace an entire monarchy's jewelry collection in wet dirt. 24. Saddam Hussein hid in a hole. After acting like an untouchable strongman, for years, Saddam Hussein cultivated the image of an unstoppable dictator. Giant statues, endless portraits, military parades, dramatic speeches. The man basically branded himself like a one-person action movie franchise. Then came the 2003 Iraq War, where that carefully crafted image collapsed spectacularly fast. American-led forces invaded Iraq, Baghdad fell, and Saddam vanished, while the world wondered where this supposedly fearless ruler had gone. Eventually, U.S. soldiers discovered him hiding inside a tiny underground bunker near Tikrit. Not a palace, not a secret luxury fortress, a cramped dirt hole. Imagine spending decades presenting yourself as the Middle East's toughest strongman, only to end your career looking like someone hiding from lawn maintenance workers. The contrast was unbelievable. This was the same man who once terrified entire populations, now discovered disheveled and isolated underground with minimal resistance. Dictators often build personalities around appearing invincible, but reality eventually catches up. Saddam spent years believing fear guaranteed permanent power. History had other plans. His downfall became one of the clearest reminders that authoritarian control can look incredibly powerful, right up until the exact moment it suddenly doesn't anymore. 25. Tsar Peter III admired Prussia. So much he betrayed Russia's own victory. Russia was actually winning the 7 Years' War against Prussia when Peter III suddenly became emperor in 1762. Most rulers inheriting a successful military campaign would probably continue enjoying the victory. Peter looked at Russia's battlefield success and essentially said, "Actually, I think I prefer the other team." The man was bizarrely obsessed with Prussian King Frederick the Great, practically treating him like a celebrity crush with cavalry units. Immediately after taking power, Peter ended Russia's war efforts, returned conquered territories, and switched alliances entirely. Russian military leaders were absolutely furious. Imagine sacrificing years of fighting, thousands of soldiers, and enormous resources only for your new emperor to hand everything back because he admired the enemy's aesthetics. Peter's behavior alienated nobles, officers, and even his own wife, Catherine. Within months, he was overthrown in a coup organized by Catherine the Great herself. Historians still view Peter III as one of Russia's strangest rulers because he somehow managed to turn military victory into national confusion almost overnight. Russia had spent years beating Prussia, only for Peter to walk in and basically announce, "You know what? I think they're cooler than us, actually." 26. Maximilian I of Mexico accepted an empire nobody wanted him to rule. In the 1860s, French Emperor Napoleon III decided Mexico needed a European monarch because, apparently, colonial overconfidence was still alive and well. Austrian Archduke Maximilian was offered the Mexican throne despite one critical problem. Most Mexicans didn't actually want an imported emperor. Maximilian accepted anyway because the idea sounded glamorous and important. It was basically the 19th century equivalent of accepting a management position without checking whether the company was actively on fire. He arrived in Mexico expecting admiration and stability. Instead, he discovered political chaos, resistance movements, and a population deeply divided over foreign intervention. Even worse, when political pressure forced France to withdraw military support, Maximilian suddenly realized his empire had the survival odds of a paper umbrella during a hurricane. Advisors begged him to flee while escape remained possible. Maximilian refused because he believed honor and determination would somehow reverse reality itself. Republican forces captured him in 1867 and executed him by firing squad. The entire disaster happened because European powers assumed they could casually install royalty in another country, like rearranging furniture. Maximilian's reign became a tragic lesson in arrogance, fantasy politics, and unbelievably poor career decisions. 27. Nicolae Ceaușescu thought a massive speech would save his dictatorship. Romanian dictator Nicolae Ceaușescu spent decades controlling the country through propaganda, fear, and an absurd cult of personality. His portrait was everywhere. His speeches were endless. State media treated him like a genius sent directly from the heavens to improve agriculture and apparently every other human activity too. But by 1989, Romania was economically devastated, citizens were furious, and communist regimes across Eastern Europe were collapsing rapidly. Ceaușescu responded to this obvious national anger with the confidence of a man who had clearly never received honest feedback in his life. He organized a giant televised speech in Bucharest expecting cheering crowds and patriotic applause. Instead, something incredible happened. The crowd started booing him live on camera. You can actually see the exact moment panic enters his face, like a man realizing the audience at karaoke night suddenly hates his entire playlist. Ceaușescu froze completely because dictators aren't trained for public criticism. Within days, his regime collapsed entirely. He and his wife attempted to flee, were captured, and executed after a rapid trial. One disastrous speech revealed the terrifying truth every authoritarian ruler eventually learns. Fear looks permanent until it suddenly evaporates all at once. History's greatest leaders sometimes made decisions dumber than expired gas station sushi. Which disaster shocked you most?